Good evening and welcome to the show. This is the First Amendment, historically speaking, and my name is Frederick Douglass Dixon, and I will be your host. Today, again, as always, but more specifically today, as the year of 2014 is coming to a close, we'd like to spend just a little time looking back and looking forward, which is definitely a very important part of what we want to make sure that we complete. So when we talk about 2014, I have to thank UPTV for allowing us to have become a part of the UPTV family. And as much as we have attempted to fit right into the programming here, we're hoping that we have brought some information that would be a little bit outside of the normal realm of historically grounded information by challenging dictums and challenging those who have forwarded information. So I thank UPTV and everybody with the staff, especially my dear friend Daniel, who has been a really great supporter and a technical guy that has made very seriously issues come to life. So without him and the staff, we would not be here. So I want to thank everybody who's involved. And again, we want to talk about 2014 and leave thoughts for 2015. So when we think about 2014, this is indeed a year of turbulence, like perhaps we haven't seen in recent years. But I don't want to go beyond the point and make 2014 a specific year. But I want to be very clear when I say that those of us who have not mastered their history are bound and doomed to repeat it. So what we've seen in 2014 has been seen before. So we need to be wise enough and critical enough about things that have transpired to give us a clear picture, a clear understanding, a clear drawing, if you will, of what we'll see in the future. So the 120 degrees wisdom, the 120 degrees knowledge, and the 120 degrees of understanding gives us a full circle. Knowledge and wisdom are excellent and very much so mandated. But I want to go to that third part, understanding. Well, a wise man said to me one time that when we have understanding, this completes the wisdom and the knowledge that we attain. Giving you an example. At one time, we can look at the idea of adding up what the number 10 equals, not symbolically, but we'll go through it. What I mean by that is one person will learn that 10 plus 0 equals 10, which it does. 9 plus 1 equals 10. 8 plus 2 equals 10. 7 plus 3 equals 10. And we all can understand that these particular things can be taught individually without the knowledge, without the understanding of all of them equaling the sum. Then we have missed out on the lessons that have been passed, the knowledge and the wisdom, because we lack understanding. So understanding is a huge part of the idea of exactly what it is that's very important and maybe what's missing, the portion that's missing within our society, in American society, the understanding. And those who create the atmosphere, the understanding that they have, I think is relatively important because we see those remnants every day. So in a turbulent year here in America, we have a couple things that we can look to in the small time that we have. I would like to look at our dear President Barack Obama, a very brilliant man, one of the most consistently understanding men that we've seen in this particular office for quite some time. Well, if we compare him to Bush 43, then we see a clear difference in exactly what it is when we talk about one who's formally educated, one who's learned, and then one who has understanding. Well, I think when we talk about Barack Obama, he has been indeed the most criticized president in quite some time. And he's forwarded some of the most important issues for those who are downtrodden and those who have been put in a seat of inferiority in a permanent position. So when we talk about his health care, you'll find lots of folks who will call this not worthy of time. But there have been millions of people who, at this time, 8 years ago, did not have health care, who now have health care. I do not look at politicians with what they call beer glasses or beer goggles. A politician is one who has been skilled to understand what people think and the idea of how they can profit from it. A very wise man said it very clearly. 9 times out of 10, when you see a politician's mouth moving, it's a lie. So we have to incorporate all of these entities when we talk about the highest office in the land. I think that just because Barack Obama is a black man, he has been under more assault, he has been under more scrutiny, and he has stood up to every test and made plenty of mistakes, and those I'm sure that he will admit. But I don't think that there's ever been a person that has been more criticized and more publicly disrespected than President Obama. Why? Because America still has an issue with race, and America's issue with race has been put under an illusion of us being in a post-racial society by his election, or let me say it clearly, his selection as the President of the United States. So what do we look to when we see President Obama? Number one, understand that this is a politician. Number two, he has the highest of regard around the world as being the leader of the free world. But in 2014, and we look to the years that came prior, he has been indeed the most disrespected president that we have seen. And why do we think that that is true? Well, America still has problems with him being the leader of the free world after so many folks have voted for him. And now this particular group is still looking to him to make light of some of the important issues that he's forwarded. And I really say it very candidly, to make him look less than intelligent, when it's very hard to be less than intelligent when you're a Harvard graduate, you've been the head of the Harvard Law Review, and one who is a constitutional lawyer. But then again, there's that word lawyer, which normally ties into that word politician. So we should be very careful in how we deal with folks under the illusion of inclusion. I would like to go to what America will do and what America has done in 2014. And America's war and assault on Islam has been well documented over the past years. And I think to us, we have been, the masses of us, who look to nightly news to give them their information. We have been overwhelmed with the problems of what Islam seems to bring. And I have to be very candid that Islam is supposedly, and I will agree wholeheartedly, Islam is a religion that can dignify. So Christianity is a religion that can dignify. So to have a group of Christians look to another group as subhuman and then be treated that way, then we have to be very critical about who profits from those particular behaviors, actions, and attitudes. So when we look to the war on Islam, and we have had a group that has been forwarded to us as a group of psychopaths, as a group of militants, and a group of murderers, and that's ISIS. And I think that the threat that comes is heightened every time we turn on the TV because of those who are forwarding the information. So as a wise group, or for us to become a more coherent group, we need to pay attention to researching our researcher. That particular coin term has at least 3 parts, 3 very vital parts. You have to find out exactly who is the researcher. You have to find out why this particular group would forward information. And number 3, find out who profits from the forwarding of this information, and you will find that number 1, number 2 are definitely locked in and without question in concert with number 3. So America has profited from the same wars that we looked to as threats upon our country. So in 2014, the creation of ISIS being our newest enemy is almost the same as creating the lies and the history that backed up 9/11 and then the wars that came after that only provided a profit for a very small group of people. So when we look to what has happened in 2014, I would look to politics under the idea of the United States government, and more specifically, those who have voted have sent a clear message that they do not like the realm and the way that the country is moving forward. So now we have a group that has been elected that is highly Republican. Now, when we say highly Republican, they've taken over X amount of seats. They've taken over X amount of portions of the Senate and the Congress, and now are in control. To pay attention to what will happen in the past, we need to master what has happened in the future, master exactly what's happened in the past. Now, we've had 8 years, if you will, a couple more years to go, but 8 years total of a Democratic president. Normally what happens after these, if you look historically, is we'll have a Republican control. So history is indeed repeating itself in 2014. It has provided boundaries and guidelines to continue to have what we have seen in the past be what we will see in the future. So with Republican control, we can look directly to things shifting to what we would say is a more conservative ideal, what will cause those of us who are the most at risk to be even more at risk educationally, socially, with the programs. Advantageously, they will look to remove some of what we call the staples of social services to use as a backdrop for budget cuts, to use backdrop as the removal of maybe perhaps some of the strongest staples in American society. So with the reinvigoration of the Republican control, if we look back over the history, we'll be very clear about what it is in the future and how this particular tale will play itself out. So we ask you to be very critical about 2014 as a guideline, as a blueprint to what will happen in 2015. So I want to look directly to education and education funding. I want you to be very clear that under certain auspices, educational funding will be under what we know as a severe revamping. We understand quite seriously what education means in our society, or the thought of what education can do in regards or comparing and contrasting to what America and their educational system has done. So in 2014, the stage is set for educational reform to take place, which will indeed tackle the idea of how some of these things will be funded. So I would ask you to pay attention to the verbiage that will be used to justify what will happen in 2015 through the verbiage that was used and created in 2014. This is the part of 2014 that none of us can get around. We have seen a public dismantling and a public reinvigoration of the thought of what black life means in America. There are clearly sides drawn. There are clearly lines drawn. There are very little groups of people who sit on the fence. The idea of Mike Brown, followed up by Eric Gardner. We don't need to go much farther than those two assassinations that literally have played out in front of the world. And then we watch one group feel as if it is justified, while another group continues to feel that these things are not just less than justifiable, and let's talk about that term, justifiable homicide. We've spoke on that briefly over the last couple shows because it is indeed current events. It is indeed one portion of looking to the history of America as to look to the future of America. And I question the idea of justifiable homicide by those who have committed homicide, those who have gotten away with homicide, and legally and systematically, even a more overarching thought, what black life is really worth in America. We have for years understood that black life has been subjected and looked to as subhuman. We can historically go back to the 3/5 agreement, the 3/5 compromise, which indeed was all about taxation and representation under the political auspices. So now today, when we see Mike Brown, well, we can even step back to 2013. There was no way for us to get around Trayvon Martin. There's no way for us to get around Mike Brown. There's no way for us to get around Eric Garner. So what do we do to make these conversations happen in a more productive manner where our comfortability or our ability to be uncomfortable while we're having these particular conversations are placed in a second-class background compared to having an earnest conversation which perhaps can lead to a change. So we have to be very serious about what it is that's important. So if we want business as usual, par for the course, then we'll look to Mike Brown, we'll look to Eric Gardner this year, and those names will be put up in the Hall of Fame as more murdered, unarmed black men, and one group will protest while another group will rejoice. Well, I say very clearly, bad news for one group can always, and always does, mean good news for another group. We have to be very clear when we look at those who control society and what has 2014 produced. Now, I think the most critical point of Mike Brown and Eric Gardner is how they came so very closely back to back, how it was reinforced by what we call those elites in the legal field and those who drive the thoughts systematically, and the statement that was made by that particular thought. Now, I want to move to look to some of these things and wonder and forward some predictions about what will happen in 2015. What will happen with the fallout from the Republican control? Historically speaking, we can look back to Reaganomics and its overwhelming success and what it did by creating what we know to be a recession, if not a depression. We've seen that in President Barack Obama's tenure as president, and we've also seen how much he has worked so very hard, he and his group, to remove the idea of what was a recession. And now when we look to America being on the rise again, America having some resemblance of a bounce back, and we can look today. If today is a watershed moment, how about you compare the gas prices to last year, last month, 10 years ago, or even the start of President Barack Obama's presidency? Something has gone right in some of the things that he's done. So in 2015, what do we expect with Republican control? We can look directly to having budget cuts to tie into some of our mandated or most vital social service programs. They will indeed be removed. Now, as far as the specifics of which programs, those who mean the most will be cut first. Those who are the most vital will be removed legally and systematically by a House that looks to the right wing as the auspices of what we call the indigenous population or the so-called American. So we are indeed at a watershed moment. 2015 will produce what we know to be a question in how things will be funded, and we will begin to see the removal of these funding at a cataclysmic rate as we continue through 2015. It will set the pace for the next president. It will set the pace for the next Congress, and they will indeed, as with the appointments of the judges in the appellate court, with the judges in the Supreme Court that will come in the near future, you'll see a far more conservative thought, which will again, as we've seen historically, justify the idea of removing mandated programs that have for years been taken as what we consider to be an everyday thing, of those things that will never be removed. They will indeed be challenged and removed by our elected politicians who are sent to represent us, who have, without their own concern, mastered the idea of what will be important to future generations, more specifically, what it is that will keep them elected. And they will question and challenge and give up and compromise some of that to what we say, go along to get along, because that's indeed a fraternity. And for all of us who are looking to Democrats and Republicans as being so far apart or diametrically opposed, I go back to the term that we used earlier. 9 times out of 10, when you see a politician's mouth moving, it's a lie. So that being a word of advice, we have to look at the Republicans and the Democrats all in the same vein, politicians. I want to continue and go to the assault on the third world. 2014 has produced a record alarming rate of the third world being under assault for natural resources. It will indeed multiply and fester through wars that are concocted for profit, through, more specifically, exactly what we know to be things that will profit America, and America will indeed continue to have an assault. And we can go back, and we're talking historically, to the Nixon administration, when in the early 70s, under the presidency of Richard Milhous Nixon, we had a Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who's, and it's very well documented, who you can find documents saying his purpose was to depopulize the world, and he wanted to start with the third world countries. They are indeed under assault. America has indeed played a huge role in how we have puppeteered that particular part of the world and how we've profited from it. I want to go to the near future and what will happen with the war on Islam. The war on Islam will indeed continue. We will, next year, 2015, and years on behind that, ISIS will be a part of our past, and there will be a new group of so-called militants who will indeed be a part of the new regime of what we call enemies, the new regime of those who will be looked to as radicals. Well, I ask you to remove yourself from America's seat of superiority and look what America does in the long term to other countries, how they starve them out. I want to look directly to the idea of America and their new so-called policies that will affect Cuba. Since the Cold War, America has stalled Cuba out. And for the Castro family, the Fidel Castro family, and his brother as well, they have long been heroes for the small man in their country, and they have stood up to America. And now, all of a sudden, America wants to lift some of the sanctions that has literally starved Cuba out over the years. Well, one of the vestiges that will come along with Cuba being re-invited to the table is this person, and a very well-documented young lady, Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur has been a military, looked to at the military as a person who should be captured. Now, there's a long history with Sister Assata Shakur. And with Sister Assata Shakur, over the years, she has found exile in Cuba, and she could not be touched because of the legal practices between America and Cuba. But now those things are being removed. And in 2015, pay strict attention to the situation around Assata Shakur and her freedom in Cuba. As we look to the erasing of the darker skinned people on the planet here in America in 2015 and 2014 forwarded at this thought, we will find the rise of the black female population and incarceration rates. They are the highest degree of people who are being, in this population, being locked up for very minor crimes, more so than the black man. So the auspices now have been switched. So instead of shooting around the periphery of the proverbial bullseye, America begins to shoot to the womb of the black race. They also say that numbers report that the highest group population that is the carriers of HIV are now Black American women. So the assault is not only what you see literally, it's theoretically, and it's being carried out by the medical world. It's being carried out scientifically as good science. And I have to say that America in 2015 will become stronger at all of these auspices. They will become stronger at removing the group that is looked to as undesirable in our society and all across the world. Now, I touched on a very few things here today, and I think that they're all important. But for clarity and depth, for someone who's much wiser than me, for all of you all who have the fortitude, the will, and the understanding, it goes back to understanding, of wanting to be far more clear on all of these issues, I say that you look to at least 52 plus part series that's called The Time and What Must Be Done by the Most Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has produced a timeline along with a speaking series that touches all of these issues in such depth with clarity that for those of us who are seeking, it makes a lot more sense for you to look to this particular person because he clears it up with giving vision, and he also clears it up with prophecy. So America in 2014 has set the stage for her own demise. America in 2015 will be up against rain, hail, snow, and earthquakes that will be uncontrollable. America in itself has time to repent, atone, and move forward. That starts with the way that you handle the Black man, woman, and child here in America. And until you are able to atone for the atrocities that happened to this particular group, which is your number one charge, then America indeed is well on their way to completing their own demise. You all, 2014 is complete. We're moving on to 2015, and we hope that each and every one of you can think more critically about what it is that you want to do in 2015, comparing it and contrasting it to what happened in 2014. And I think that we'll become a far wiser group when we look at this very critically. Ladies and gentlemen, this information may in no means change your mind, but because truth and you are so very important to me, I just thought you ought to know. Thank you,